our first Vishwaneedam Stridham annual lecture. Pete Stridham is an ethical emigre from South Africa, having his initial days and studies in South Africa, and then he left South Africa as a protest against the apartheid regime. He came to Liverpool, and almost for the last 6 decades or so, he came to Ireland, and he taught at University College Cork. He's a deep social thinker and theorist of our times, and his major contribution lies in, for example, foregrounding the calling of responsibility to sociology, and also his engagement with knowledge and society, and a rereading of the history of sociology, and his contribution to critical theory, especially engaging with Karl Otto Appel, the philosopher, sociologist Jürgen Habermas. And one of his primary contributions is, for example, opening up the notion of the double, like self and the other, and both double, self and the other, have contingency. Acknowledging contingency has been a very important aspect of creative and critical theory, not taking everything as fate, but contingent. And that contingent reading is that something could have been done otherwise. What has happened does not mean necessarily that it is fated to happen, and it could have been done otherwise. And that also brings the role for agency, for creativity. Creativity and contingency are related. So Professor Stridham has made the contribution of triple contingency, not only self and the other, but the third. And this third is an open third. It is not just a literal third, but it is an open third. And it is not just numerically limited. And that triple contingency and collective learning has been a very important contribution of Pete Stridham. But also he's cultivating a path of a new cognitive sociology, and that is his major work. And he is a deep seeker. He has inspired so many students, so many teachers, and he's less, fountain of creativity, love, abundance, and sharing. Very rarely one finds a person in flesh and blood who offers himself to the path of co-learning without any distinction, without any hierarchy. We know that there is a problem of geopolitics of knowledge. It is a reality that, for example, some people from some parts of the world, they do not relate to scholars from other parts of the world as equal co-seekers. This is a reality of life. And unfortunately, we are suffering from that colonial geopolitics of knowledge. Secondly, there is also a hierarchy in the knowledge system itself. Even the so-called egalitarian society, there is a hierarchy between the teacher and the taught. And but Pete embodies a spirit of spontaneous and non-announcing relationality. It is not that you announce yourself that you are equal to others, but the spontaneous and non-announcing, non-enunciative kind of creative equality, each one of us as seekers, is a deep personal contribution of Pete Stridham to the world of knowledge. And so therefore we want to engage with the work of Pete, paying, it is not just a tribute, but a substantive engagement with many dimensions of his work. And we are grateful for Professor Siamas Otuama for presenting our first Pete Stridham lecture. And Professor Otoama studied with Professor Strider, and he also edited a book in honor of Professor Strider at his 60th year, with a conference in 2007, and the book coming a few years later. And I remember his very deep statement, both in the book and the conference, that when Pete Stridham arrived in Ireland, he comes as an enlightenment figure. And that is, what is that enlightenment? That enlightenment figure is that, there are two modalities of enlightenment. One is the enlightenment and the kind of trajectory, but the other enlightenment is that, yes, enlightenment critiques conventions. Enlightenment critiques the non-helpful traditionality, but it critiques in a way that it helps us to transform. It is not just a distantiated critique. I think Pete's contribution to Irish public life is, it is not just a distantiated critique, it is an engaged critique in which his students and fellow thinkers are challenged to think about the taken for conventions of life. So with this offering, we welcome Professor Siamos Tuama to our Vishwaneedam Center for ASEAN Blossoming, and we invite you to kindly present your first Pete Stridham annual lecture.
Thank you very much, Ananta. And that was a very nice introduction of Pete Stridham. And of course, I'm sure all of our colleagues are familiar with Pete and his work. But of course, I had the privilege and honor of studying with Pete as an undergraduate student. And later, Pete was the supervisor for my PhD. And through all of that, I suppose I was very honored to have the benefit of having a world-class scholar, and as you say, somebody who was really an enlightenment figure in the Irish context, in the sociology department at the university. He brought a whole new dimension to thinking, and out of which developed a whole range of important figures who went to all different places around the world to make a contribution, and many continue to make the contribution in Ireland as well, may I say. So it is a great honor, and I'm very happy to do this. It's been a little bit of I suppose, a renewal for me, because while I have continued to connect with and relate with critical social theory, and draw on critical social theory for my other dimensions and my other areas, I had in fact moved from initially from the sociology department to the Department of Government and Politics, and then ultimately to the Department for Adult and Continuing Education in UCC. So I've been, I suppose, out a little bit on the periphery of much of what was happening in the last few years. But so I was very pleased to get the invitation from Ananta and an opportunity to reacquaint myself with some of the thinking, and also to explore some topics and issues which were very much engaging my mind, and I wanted to look at them in a bit more detail. My proposal today would be to read the lecture, and I can give a copy of this to Ananta for those who are interested. I have a PowerPoint presentation because I realize listening to somebody reading for a long time isn't not very engaging. So I'll run the PowerPoint presentation in the background, but I will largely read the lecture. So I hope that's okay. I'll try now to share the screen, and hopefully that will work, and you can tell me if it's working. And can you see that now? Yeah. Okay. So the title I chose today is Anyone Listening? media, social media, ethical abstinence, and discursive prospects. In some ways, the title for the lecture came from a conversation I had with Pete in Kinsale maybe a month or so ago. And we had a very, very nice conversation where we went back and forth on various issues of the day and around critical theory and all of that as well. But this, I suppose, was a kind of an issue or question that was on our minds, and certainly was on my mind. Is anyone listening? So, is anyone listening in this time of talking? Media, social media, ethical absence, triple contingency, and discursive prospects. I realize that this is a very big title and a very big question. I'm certain that I cannot come even remotely close to answering it. I'm equally certain that it is a question that needs addressing. Of course, it is also true that many actors in many fields are addressing similar topics, maybe not framed in exactly the way I am framing it. This is a critical issue of our time. Critical social theorists can contribute some exceptionally important insights, but no one sector, no one field of study can come close to offering the equivalent of a grand unified theory on contemporary discourse and the political, social, and existential chaos in which we seem to be currently mired. I will take a more modest approach in this lecture. I will try to identify what I see as some key challenges, ones that may be novel, reflecting the historical moment we are in. That historical moment is marked by weak politics, the amplification of many competing and often bizarre worldviews, global insecurity and conflict, a raging climate crisis, advances in artificial intelligence, and one in which there seems to be an enhanced emphasis on speaking and being heard, and much less on reflecting, listening, and hearing. Stridham's exploration of triple contingency offers a way of understanding public discourse, even in this time of chaos. We need to consider if it also offers hope towards generating more civil and tolerant discourse, where concepts like the force of the better argument can gain traction. Horkheimer, Adorno, and Machinery for Reply. Referring to the emergence of social media, Joule 2012 mused that Horkheimer and Adorno would have welcomed social media due to their criticism of the then modern mass media for being essentially a one-way process. And they said no machinery for reply has been developed. Interestingly, Horkheimer and Adorno were writing their critique at almost exactly the same time that David Bowie was writing the song Space Oddity. In his famous lyrics, Major Tom is lost in space, aware of and resigned to his plight. And quote from the song lyrics. For here am I sitting in a tin can, far above the world. Planet Earth is blue, and there's nothing I can do. From a retrospective, nostalgic perspective, we could look at the late 1960s as the culmination of a decade of change and new thinking, in which the prospects for the future seemed uncertain and the spectre of potential dystopia is latent. Coming to this lecture, I shared the sense of disconnection that has led to loss of the agency, the supreme achievement of Major Tom, who's told by ground control that, quote, you've really made the grade. And yet he is floating in a tin can far above the world, with the power to observe, reflect, but devoid of all agency. We can understand why Horkheimer and Adorno would have yearned for machinery for reply, but what if reply drifts into the ether, into the abyss, where there is no rational engagement, no sounding board of triple contingency? That realization that there is no longer a stop, no longer a point beyond which things may not proceed, has been seized by a generation of oligarchs, by far-right influences, by purveyors of toxic masculinity, climate change deniers, science deniers, those that despise rational discourse and civility. Excuse me for a moment, I just need to take some water. The consequences of this are felt in disrespect for individuals and whole populations. International law is recoiling, given that powerful actors may disregard international law, treaties, and conventions with impunity. The machinery of reply are in the hands of anyone who is IT literate and has access to the internet. It is almost a Hobbesian world of every man against every other man. After a long period of rulemaking and an expansion of rules at international level, there is now a clear challenge to international rules, but also this domestic constitutional rules, human rights. There is equally an increasing challenge to what are deemed elitist cultural values, reflected in, quote, an escalating challenge to the authority of the administrative state and the role of expert knowledge. This is from Gauchant. Much discussion has framed this in the narrative of culture wars. However, culture wars may be more the symptom than the underlying cause of the contemporary flux. Legacy media and crisis. The Reuters Institute Digital News Report 2025 raises very many issues of concern in relation to media consumption, especially vis-a-vis news, which indicate a worrying trend that at this point in time poses serious questions about the possibility of maintaining democratic norms, which depend on a vibrant public sphere. The writer's research indicates that younger people tend to be much more comfortable with automated selection on social media across all domains. While young people in Western and Northern Europe are less comfortable with automated selection than other parts of the world. It should not be assumed that this would be.
Final thing, actually, I congratulate as a team.
Are we okay? Can you hear me?
To really have courage to take this venture. All, I wish the best of luck. Thank you very much.
Sorry. Is everything okay?
Yeah, please you continue.
Okay, sorry. I was just somebody else was speaking there. I wasn't sure what it was. Okay. Right. So I'll just go back a little bit there. So while young people in Western and Northern Europe are less comfortable with automated selection than other parts of the world, it should not be assumed that this would be a permanent trend or that it might help reverse trends in other regions. More and more online content is being driven by algorithms. Reuters research suggests close to half of respondents are comfortable with news personalization. While this is somewhat lower than other domains, it still indicates that half of their international sample are happy to be consumers who do not seek out news from other sources. In some ways, the thing that ostensibly looked like it might be the machinery for reply that Horkheimer and Adorno that was missing has turned out not only to lack the feedback, but also lacks the rigor of legacy media. It is important to note that I am not suggesting that there was some magical moment in which the legacy media was willing, able, and brave enough to always report objectively. We can see today venerable institutions like the BBC struggling to report without fear or favour. The conflict in Gaza, in so many ways, exposes the general hypocrisy of the legacy media in terms of how the conflict is reported in different countries and to different audiences. The same could be said about the war in Ukraine or the lack of attention to the war in Sudan. Legacy media has some honourable exceptions, with some honourable exceptions, tend to report the news that feel best fits their audience. even at that, if they tip the cap to objectivity and rigor. At best, we can offer an aspiration for a free and open media to aspire towards objectivity. That objective is unlikely to be ever fully met. However, a strong tendency towards objectivity would be a considerable asset for free and open debate and on key issues of public concern. Hugh holds that, quote, only welfare maximizing, non-slanting media outlets can mitigate media bias in the presence of online media. This is an interesting supposition, as it seems to suggest that the presence of a less biased take on a story reduces the slanting tendency of other media. This could ultimately offer an important partial panacea for the dissemination of exaggerated, false and misleading news. He sees this as a way of countering the tendency created by market conditions for news as media firms, as conditions for news as media firms cater to the biased preferences of their consumers. It could also potentially be a counterweight to user-generated content, in which there ultimately is little commitment to pressure to achieve balance, or indeed a need to fact-check content. I just realized now I never moved on my my slides. Okay. Okay. It could also potentially be a counterweight to a user-generated content, in which there ultimately is little commitment or pressure to achieve balance, or indeed a need to fact-check content. It may, in fact, be of commercial interest to the platforms for users to be controversial in order to drive engagement. While Hugh offers an interesting hypothesis on the intervention of a third type of actor, an unbiased welfare-maximizing media that is concerned not with profit but the public good, there are some significant shortcomings to his model. First, who might be motivated to establish such an entity? We have seen increasing challenges to public broadcasters, for instance, from politicians and indeed the public, who are not happy with the content. Relying on the taxpayer funding such media is proving increasingly problematic. Even then, to what extent could we rely on public media to be able to maintain objectivity in the face, for instance, of a hostile government? This week, for instance, the Trump administration reduced the budget for public broadcasting in the US, despite the fact that this was already assigned by Congress. Referring to Hungary, a country marked by a polarized polity and a government determined to disseminate its version of the news, Bajomi Lazar and Hovard describe it as having two media systems with two journalistic cultures, in which the publicly owned media is motivated by a need to collaborate with the government, while the private media is effectively motivated by profit. In that context, who could create the sort of middle ground arbiter of facts, fairness and balance envisaged by who? As Rodriguez Guinness et al. Put it, many users often become entangled in the webs of disinformation, a significant portion of which can be attributed to media bias. They also provide a figure, which I can include, which outlines key factors that they identify as distorting news presentation. This is a useful analytical tool, but the idea that there is inherent bias in the media, both legacy and new media, is not new. Neither is it uncomplicated. Boycott and Boycott carried out an analysis of reporting on climate change in the prestige press, which they defined as the New York Times, the Washington Post, Los Angeles Times, and Wall Street. Wall Street Journal in the United States in the early part of this century. They strongly argued that balanced reporting is actually problematic in practice when discussing the human contribution to global warming and resulting calls for action to combat it. They point out that balanced reporting in the traditional sense is not the same as accurate reporting, and also that journalists very often are not experts in the field, nor do they have the time and resources to dig more deeply into the story. Balance has historically been seen as the bulwark of professional journalism. We can see how even something that seemed rational, logical, and fixed has become increasingly contingent in a world of mass information and opinion, not all of which, for instance, has the same scientific validity, nor factual veracity. Add to this a depletion of resources and changes in ownership and the political climate. Evidence, for instance, in the reluctance of both the Washington Post and Los Angeles Times to endorse Kamala Harris in the 2024 US presidential election, and the distinction between legacy and online media becomes even more blurred. In an article critiquing The Guardian editorial on October 18, 2018 for its transgender stance, Gleason sums up an ongoing issue with the liberal press. As long, this is quoting, as long as it remains a liberal publication, The Guardian will continue to turn with the breeze and to endorse movements of the state. Here, the newspaper seems to get lost in a fog of presenting balance and placating transphobic sections of its readership that could be seen as liberal in other issues. The BBC became mired in another liberal lacuna in its dealing with the conflict in Gaza, finding itself in the crosshairs for demonstrating both anti-Israeli and anti-Palestinian bias. A free press needs to understand balance is in a more sophisticated way than simply restating on the one hand and on the other hand. It clearly needs to challenge misinformation. It needs also to confront its consumers and the wider public with uncomfortable news. It cannot always sit on the telephone wires and observe. It has to recognize that an active, engaged media is necessary to facilitate and animate public discourse. Is that possible in today's climate? Is indeed a critical question for our times. I next want to move to pluralism in retreat, ethical abstinence, moral certainty, and Trumpism. And I don't want the lecture to be about Trump as such, but it's important to refer to him and his activities. Discussions on ethical abstinence are contentious and topical in the contemporary context, with significant and real political import. If we can say that we see a strict border between morality and ethics, this is quoting from Hogan and Marcel, who are we talking to? This, I am sure, sounds like a facetious question, but in contemporary politics, I believe it is a critical question. The answer to which is even more troubling. We are often only talking to ourselves. What I mean by that is that we are seeing the demise of pluralism across what we in the past considered democratic liberal societies. The very idea of us both withholding our judgment as to the ways of life of others in a pluralistic global society, relegating these issues to particularistic questions of the good as opposed to universal questions of justice. Again, it was quoting Hogan and Marcel. We may be deluding ourselves into imagining that this could be reciprocally acknowledged as tenable across society. Instead, we are seeing politicians and very many citizens making claims of validity solely on the basis of their moral beliefs, presenting their moral stance as not only valid, but indeed universally valid, even sine qua non. When US President Donald Trump sanctioned an ICC, International Criminal Court, that is official, he justified this, referring to the US and Israel as, quote, thriving democracies with militaries that strictly adhere to the laws of war. The status of countries as democracies or otherwise is totally irrelevant, as is the record of adherence of their militaries to the laws of war. This is prefaced by his claim that the ICC has, quote, abused its power by issuing baseless arrest warrants targeting Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and former Minister of Defense Yoav Gallant. His moral outrage is presented as being both factual and relevant, when it is neither. We might say, far from adopting a stance of ethical abstinence, he adopts one of moral certainty, primarily on the basis of his own and his allies' actions, on the basis that his and his allies' actions should be beyond the remit of the ICC or possibly any other court to investigate. It is a stance that aligns better with the notion of the divine right of kings than a democratic polity. I don't want this lecture to be about Trump and Trumpism, but I want to refer to it as possibly the most high-profile and outrageous attack, not just on any semblance of boundary between morals and ethics, but even against basic common sense, never mind rationality. It is not a retreat from pluralism, democracy, and the conventions of a right-based civil society. It is a full-blown and unmitigated attack on it. We could explore this through many lenses, but I think his hostility to gender identity and migrants are two good places to highlight the key point. He has demonstrated a particular hostility towards LGBTQ+ communities, and particularly trans people, who are less than 1% of the total population in the US and face widespread discrimination and violence already. And this is a quote from Gorkasil. This can be seen as problematic at many levels. From a rights perspective, governments have a special responsibility to ensure that the rights of the more vulnerable communities are protected. This is precisely the point that Justice Sotomayor makes in her dissent to the majority view on the United States versus Scrimetti case. She accuses the majority of the Supreme Court of, quote, retreating from meaningful judicial review exactly where it matters most. The court abandons transgender children and their families to political whims, unquote. That would require a more detailed discussion than we can afford today. I want us to stay closer to the idea of ethical abstinence for now, because it points to what I believe is ultimately the hollowing out of civil society, democracy, rights, and the rule of law. On the latter point, I would like to return to another decision of the US Supreme Court and an executive order that indicate a troubling shift in that direction, and to discuss it in the context of what has been termed reflexive modernity. On assuming power, Trump signed an executive order which claimed to defend, quote, women from gender ideology extremism. What in effect this does is frame the discussion based on a moral certainty. The text includes strong assertions of moral certainty around gender identity, quote, purposeful attacks against the ordinary and long-standing use and understanding of biological and scientific terms, replacing the immutable biological reality of sex with an internal, fluid and subjective sense of self, unmoored from biological facts, invalidating the true and biological category of women, unquote. This language is not only a direct assault on members of the LGBTQ community to order their own self-identity, but it also challenges the concept of universal right to equality. In particular, for women and members of the LGBTQ+ community, it pushes back against what Beck, Bunce, and Lau call reflexive modernity. This is a pushback against our freedom to reflexively understand and acknowledge openly who we are as persons. Each person needs the freedom to, quote, navigate by the compass of their own personal concerns, Archer, in order to make the decisions that shape their lives. Gaetano captures the idea of reflexivity as self-generated internal discourse in which an individual can consider various scenarios around their own lives, drawn on both, quote, personal concerns and the conditions that make it possible to accomplish them. This touches the very core of what we understand as autonomy and choice-making. This is relevant for members of the LGBTQ plus community, but is equally relevant to each of us. If by chance someone's self-identity rhymes with what is morally acceptable, then perhaps it is not as evident to them that their rights are constrained, as much as those whose identity does not fit in the moral box. Beck, Bonds, and Lau describe reflexive modernity as a vast field of social experiment. It is a competition over different imaginable communities emerging from a cocktail of driving forces like globalization and a weakening of traditional norms, bonds, and cultural understandings. While society is always in a process of change, this moment is one in which we have reached a sort of end of modernity, where modernity itself is being transformed in a process of modernization of modern society. The world is undergoing several social, economic, and political changes, many of which ultimately link back to the physical transformation of our planet, like climate change, that are locally and regionally pernicious and globally challenging our very existence. That we need with urgency is open and what we need in urgency is open and expansive thinking to counter what Bin Habib calls a, quote, a rage against rationalization, which is generating a plethora of cultural as well as political and religious fundamentalisms. This rage attempts to deny debate, opposing perspectives, even empirical evidence. Trump, for instance, in his 2024 campaign alleged that migrants from Haiti were eating pets. Not only did this not have any factual basis, but his allegations were impervious to, quote, fact checkers, rebuttals, and city official denials. Gorgasel. Here, he and his supporters continued to repeat the allegations. No amount of amplification of facts could dent or constrain that in any way. This contagion seems to have extended to the US Supreme Court, which, since the middle of the last century at least, was seen as one of the fundamental and permanent bulwarks against any erosion of human rights in the US. This impacted well beyond the US itself, because the US had an outsized global influence given its preeminence as the world's strongest military and economic power, and one that ostensibly supported democratic and rights-based values. In her dissent against the Supreme Court's lifting of a preliminary injunction preventing the executive branch from substantially shutting down the Federal Department of Education, Justice Sotomayor directed criticism at overreach by the executive branch and weakness by the Supreme Court. And quoting from her, she says, "When the executive publicly announces its intent to break the law and then executes on that promise, it is the judiciary's duty to check that lawlessness, not expedite it." I think this is a really, really powerful quote and a really, really important one for us to reflect upon. She quotes directly from the Constitution, which had been a revered statement of fundamental law, not just for Americans, but internationally. She pulls from it its instruction to the executive to, quote, take care that the laws be faithfully executed, unquote. In essence, the executive branch under Trump consistently challenges legal processes at home and abroad and castigates members of the judiciary with which it does not agree. Ignoring the boundaries of authority between the executive, legislative, and judicial branches of government. The fundamental separation of powers, as laid out in the US Constitution, is one beyond which few would have imagined even the Trump presidency could achieve, even if it was a fervent aspiration. The constitutional fundamentals had by and large stood firm for over 200 years, presenting to us the false impression that it was like a lighthouse that would withstand all political tides and seasons. But as Sotomayor states, it is exactly what they have done, stepping into the functions of Congress, even though, quote, in our constitutional order, Congress makes laws and the president faithfully executes them, unquote. Sotomayor seems equally dismayed by the judicial branch's unwillingness to check, quote, the lawlessness of the executive, thus abdicating its role too. Sotomayor's dissent essentially points to the executive branch having stolen the only are we okay? Sotomayor's dissent essentially points to the executive branch having stolen not only the clothes of the legislative branch, but indeed the judicial branch too. There is a significant difference between reckless bumbling and concerted action. Many observers mistakenly place Trumpism in its first iteration, 2016-2020, into the first category. It should now be clear that this is a well-considered strategic approach. Philosophically, we are perhaps in a world more familiar to Hobbes than Habermas. And now I want to come to a discussion around triple contingency and sorry, no, I didn't move on there with my slides. I want to talk about triple contingency and discursive prospects. Pete Stridham has been exploring the concept of triple contingency for many years now, framing its importance in, quote, in communication societies in which the public plays a crucial role, unquote. He presents a very concise and clear definition of triple contingency, which it is useful for us to reprise, stating that it to be, quote, the contingency that the public, as the bearer of a third point of view, bring into communicative relations and hence into the social process, unquote. He presents it as a logical expansion of Habermas's double contingency. It brings to light the role of the public in shaping discussions, debates, arguments, perceptions, contestations, which are not solely dependent on a binary engagement of, quote, ego as having to compel, alter by means of the better argument, unquote. Of equal importance for today's discussion is how Stridham frames Habermas's view of the polity. This being, quote, an association of free and equal members of a legal community with the same rights, whose political freedom coincides with its constitution-creating practice. This would be a political community characterized by, quote, equality for the discriminated and the establishment of relations with the marginalized, without locking them up in the uniformity of a community characterized by some pre-political similarity. In the contemporary political climate, these perspectives are anathema to the ruling elites in very many countries. They stand in contradiction, in whole or in part, to renewed nationalistic fervour, religious fundamentalism, absolutist and populist orientations on both the left and right. While Stridham was putting pen to paper and formulating these ideas over a quarter of a century ago, there was greater optimism, hope, and perhaps even an expectation that the Habermasian model would become embedded in Western liberal democracies and ultimately extend across the globe. Optimistically, we may say we are now in a moment of occlusion. It is not totally clear if the current political climate is an indication of permanent regression, polarization, or simply a pause before a renewed phase of political evolution towards more inclusive, just, and equitable polities and global community. What we urgently need today is a vision for how we might help nurture a renewal in civil society, democratic values, human rights, respect, dignity, and an openness to contestation of publicly important issues in a climate where we genuinely seek solutions based on the force of the better argument, and one in which we see contingency as positive, where there are no absolutes, no dogmatic and fixed points of view, and where all of us are open to consider different perspectives. In Stridham's engagement with Habermas, he points out the clear advances made by Habermas in developing a significantly more rounded understanding of quote, language as the primary means for the transmission of cultural as well as communicative dimensions of action coordination, unquote. At the risk of bringing us, with Alice, through the looking glass, we are faced today with the use of language, not in the logical framework assumed here, but for the purposes of the dismissal of other perspectives and the perspective of others, obfuscation, misdirection, and false narratives. It is not about the force of the better argument as much as the removal of anything resembling a solid footing to engage in reasonable debate aimed at finding a shared understanding. At a very local level, there is an illustrative example here in Cork of how language can become whatever the speaker wants it to mean. A representative of the Irish People's Party has recently appeared in court in relation to harassment of a member of staff of the Cork Public Library. He and colleagues engaged in harassment of the staff member in 2023, objecting to the library stocking the book, and quote the name of the book, "This Book is Gay." The alleged harassment was both in person and online. What is of interest in today's discussion is how the book and the staff member were described online by the accused individual. He is quoted as saying, quote, "The book is grooming. These people are hand-picked evil. My blood boils when they try to defend this obscene filth. Twisted individuals, 100% doing Satan's work. They are the epitome of evil. They are perverts. They are vile enablers. They encourage this filth, knowingly defending the indefensible," unquote.
Hello, Shyamas, your speech has stopped. Is everything okay? Dear friend, Shyamas is joining again. Let us wait. Dear friends, it seems that there is a little technical problem. Professor Shyamas has logged out, so we are waiting for him to join. In the meantime, we are enriched by the presence of Professor Anthony Palakal. Welcome. So Professor Palakal was to chair the session because of some communication challenge. So we could not have him from the beginning. So welcome, Professor Palakal.
Thank you, Professor Giri. Yes, and it's also I am also, confronting technical challenge here because of the heavy rain happening. Yeah, so I
But
don't know
as
what's
we are
happening at that
as we
yet.
are able to speak, so welcome to our Vishwaneedam. You have joined us before. Yes.
Yes, yes.
So
Okay, let's wait for the professor to join.
yeah. He has already begun and spoken for nearly 25 minutes. We are just okay. As Professor Siamas is connecting, so we can use a little intermediate moment to have a discussion on this theme. Dear friends, those of you who have joined late, like Professor Palakal and Tamanna, this is our Pete Stridum annual lecture. And today the theme was, is anybody listening? And so far, Professor Siamas has been saying that the problem with social media and the problem of uh, you know destruction of civil society in the recent political upsurge in USA with President Donald Trump and others. And in this, how it is important to listen. And so on this theme, as we are waiting for Professor Siamas to join in, so let us give our thought a little bit. Now, Gianluigi, you have been listening from the beginning. So I invite you to please share some thought, Gianluigi. We cannot hear you. We cannot hear you, Gianluigi.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Thank you very much. No, yes, it was very interesting. The problem, there are many problems, many questions connected to these subjects. I personally do not know very much about the sentences of the Supreme Court, the US Supreme Court. That is, I should deepen myself in this investigation because I cannot in this moment locate the question. I have the impression that in general, much in the contemporary debate is, so to speak, concentrated on the questions of civil rights, individual rights, but there is not so much attention, at least in some countries, in Italy for sure, about the question of social rights. These also educational rights, could be school rights and schooling rights, I think, I mean, and economical rights. These I see, at least in the debates in Europe, a strong tendency to deal with all the questions concerning gender theory, concerning the, so to speak, the civil rights. But I have the impression that at least in the last 20 years, there has no been, or at least there's been a little, few attention for the question of the social right, which goes with the same step in which all the social rights have been, at least in the European Union, have been neglected, I would say, or anyway, have been left out of consideration, out of attention. I think that in the last 20 years, there have been, so to speak, a regress as regards social rights, at least in the European Union. And this is something which now is to be felt in many fields which interest the constellation of the European Union. I would say this because I see also in many intellectuals that they deal very much with gender theory, with civil rights, but they have forgotten that social rights are also civil rights. I think that different austerity programs, which have been heavily criticized by some economists, like, for instance, also Amartya Sen, but not only, of course, Amartya Sen, in the European Union have been brought a constellation in which these conceptions of social rights, which are so also connected to the civilization, should be connected to civilization, should be something which belongs to a conception of civilization, at least to my concept of civilization, have been forgotten. And I think they have been, at least in some political constellations, have been intentionally forgotten because one of the aims of some political party was to restrict the social rights, to have shortcuts as regards all the expenses which belongs to the social rights. And this has brought about, in my opinion, a regress also in the spiritual mood of the European constellation. At least this is the impression which I have. But anyway, it was very interesting, all the themes which have been dealt with during the exposition, and therefore I thank you very much for inviting me and for giving me the opportunity to participate and also to say something about my ideas. Thank you very much. I hope
Thank you.
you can hear me, because I do not know whether I do not know why I had these problems with the microphone. I could hear you very well. I could see you, but I do not know why you could not hear me. I
No,
hope now it is.
we could hear you from
Thank you.
after 1 minute. We could hear you. Thank
Yes.
you.
Thank you.
But also you think about this issue of ethical abstinence. Later on, we would pick up this theme. I
Yes.
got a message from Professor Syamas that he is trying to connect, and there is Professor Syamas has joined us. Yes. So now, Professor Syamas, please continue.
I'm really sorry. I don't understand what happened. I was just speaking, and then it was just which point? I'm not sure where I disappeared.
No,
Maybe I just go back
mainly
to-
you had told about a rage against rationalization and how important for the renewal of civil society and democracy. So you were in the section on pluralism and how retreat from pluralism, and you had come almost towards, that point discussing rage against rationalization and renewal of democracy.
Was I speaking about Pete's work?
After Pete work, you had come to this.
And did I mention about the library? Was I speaking about the library?
Yes, library, a book.
Okay, well, I'll just go back to this piece about the library. I'm really sorry, I'm not so sure what happened there, but it just disappeared. So I'll just move on. I just read a piece about the book, and he said, he's quoted as saying, quote, "This book is grooming. These people are hand-picked evil. My blood boils when they try to defend this obscene filth. Twisted individuals, 100% doing Satan's work. They are the epitome of evil. They are perverts. They are vile enablers. They encourage this filth, knowingly defending the indefensible," unquote. The book in question was reviewed largely positively. For instance, quote, "In addressing the subject in a cheerful, cheeky, unscary way, he manages to be both funny and serious, to demystify and chat," unquote. The language used by the accused is highly emotive, intimating that the library is engaged in a major attack on public morals and even in diabolic activity, not just as an institution, but also by the members of the staff. The Irish People's Party is one amongst a plethora of parties that Tillman 2021 describes as populist radical right parties that have emerged in Europe. He bases his analysis around what he describes as a, quote, "worldview evolution," in which there is a polarization between high and low authoritarianism. The high authoritarians are, quote, "oriented towards social conformity and the maintenance of social cohesion and security at the expense of individual autonomy," unquote. Wishing, quote, "to preserve national identity and sovereignty, protect the social order and promote social cohesion against values and democratic changes," unquote. The low authoritarians, quote, "the low authoritarians have moved towards left liberal parties that promote individual autonomy, universalism, and multiculturalism." From this perspective, the Irish People's Party activists may be seen to be acting in a strategic way in terms of his opposition to things like social diversity, autonomy, multiculturalism, and reflexive identity formation. The language he is quoted as using is not only extreme, but has no empirical basis and is not oriented towards engaging in anything like open, rational debate. From his perspective, the facts are proven. Contesting them is, in that sense, futile. For us, the question is, how can we reach this person and people like him? I don't mean that just philosophically, but in terms of him ever hearing an alternative perspective, apart from maybe during his court hearing. He is unlikely to trust the legal system, nor to engage with the legacy media. The force of the better argument, the idea of issues being teased out in a fully engaged public sphere, is not something to which he is likely to subscribe. It is not fair to dismiss his position as being devoid of cause. The political system, especially since the emergence of neoliberalism, has tended to favour the more privileged in society at the expense especially of the economically marginalised. I want to open a line of discussion about which I have formed no firm conclusions, in which, in his 1999 article on triple contingency in Philosophy and Social Criticism, Stridham presents a very important exposition of the emergence of civil society. He outlines the changes that emerged from the early modern period, facilitated by, quote, "the breakdown of the religious worldview and the church's loss of monopoly over the official interpretation of reality," unquote, leading over time through a series of societal changes to the emergence of, quote, a diffuse and unknown public. And while people, unquote, quote, gaining a new competence, aesthetic judgment, and ultimately becoming, quote, engaged in critical debate about the state, government, and the exercise of political power, unquote. The public is a critical dimension of his theory of triple contingency. He refers to the exponential increase in the numbers of books printed and being circulated. Being literate also gave people access to newspapers. In the 20th century, we saw a huge growth in broadcast media, initially radio and television, and later television. All of these developments offered material to feed public debate and public discourse, a consciousness of all the key events of the day, notwithstanding that the selection of news was made at an editorial level. Nonetheless, triple contingency had a role in shaping that too. The mass media ultimately responded to their audience tastes, wishes, and things like their political views. And while they may not have had machinery for reply, as called for by Horkheimer and Adorno, they were not oblivious of public debate. They were heavily influenced by and facilitated through process of triple contingency. In the 20th century, this was still primarily a primarily elite agenda-setting frame. What Sheridan describes as, in his historical context setting, is a movement initially of a relatively small group of intellectuals, mostly men of some independent means. Over time, those circles developed and expanded and eventually emerged into the diffuse and unknown public. It never encompassed the totality of society. There were always swathes of people who were marginal or lagging behind these societal evolutions. While substantially more of the population were engaged than in the early modern period, nonetheless, the sectors of society who subscribed to parties like the Irish People's Party, Tillman's high authoritarians, were less heard and less influential. These are representatives of people from marginalized groups in advanced economies, including ethnic minorities, so second and third generation migrants, those in low pay and precarious employment, for instance, people in remote regions, and so on. Even today, there is a substantial portion of the global population that is not literate or has very low levels of literacy. I'm not raising anything new here, merely echoing a point in relation to context around what might be an animated public sphere. That dynamic changed with the emergence of online platforms, where everyone could speak and where all kinds of ideas could be promulgated. Without, it should be said, previous power of dampening down or perhaps even censorship of elitist and intellectual counter-arguments by people who very often had greater stake in society in terms of education, wealth, health, influence, and opportunity. Please don't misunderstand my point. I am not endorsing intemperate, inaccurate, hate-filled, conspiracy-driven language. I am making the point that they could be promulgated without constraint, especially when things like fact-checking are removed or reduced. It creates the illusion of freedom of speech to say anything about anything or anyone, regardless of its basis in reality or its consequences. It is like you remove the mirror and replace it with a void. This presents me with a question. If in the contemporary world we are at a junction similar to where in the early modern period it was the breakdown of the religious worldview that saw a shift in worldview to one where a breakdown of a pluralistic liberal worldview is leading to a new societal trajectory. One where things like truth-telling, the power of argumentation, considered debates, respectful recognition of others, democracy and rights are seen as being encumbrances in the way of creating microcosm societies that adhere to values that do not accord with pluralism. Is it possible to some extent to retreat into a bubble through social media, where you can engage only with like-minded people? In that bubble, triple contingency is still a phenomenon. It is not possible to close out all opposing ideas. It is not possible to live in a world where you do not encounter the other. Sometimes the other ends up being a close relative, for instance, in relation to gender identity, or any of the myriad other ways people engage with who they are in reflexive modernity. You can put your finger on the face of the clock and stop the hands moving, but you cannot stop societal evolution as easily. Is this the era in which almost everyone is sucked into the vortex of civil society? By seeking to find refuge in closed spaces with strong shared worldviews, will this ultimately have the opposite effect, one in which the mass of the population are engaged in discourse, initially perhaps with a focus on closing down debate, but ultimately creating the conditions for debate? While the challenge exists in how we imagine constructive ways to engage in the public, engage all the public on all important issues, public issues, where we are today was signaled a long way out by Stridham when stating that, quote, "We have come to recognize that the public plays an active part even at the level of mass communication. This is particularly the case in contemporary societies that are increasingly assuming the form of communication societies." There is little doubt today that we are in a communication society. If we have a problem, it may be that communication is highly diffused. There are fewer shared mediated spaces. There are, of course, many loud voices, some with mass followings. We have ultra-elite oligarchs presenting themselves as the voice of the people, attempting with significant success to persuade many people that they in fact speak for them against intellectual elites. Intellectual elites have unwittingly aided this process through condescension, dismissing perspectives as nonsensical, and ironically through the force of the better argument. It is undoubtedly the case that much of what is presented as fact, framing that what constitutes the good, what is morally certain, does not stand up to scrutiny. However, how we engage with people around these topics requires more patience and sensitivity than we are seeing. Responding to every insult with a counter insult is not likely to gain the considered attention of the other. There are some really good examples, for instance, in how toxic masculinity can be successfully addressed in school settings. Speaking about challenging indicators of toxic masculinity, like sexist and homophobic language, Eliot outlines a strategy, and this is in relation to a school, and an incident in relation to toxic masculinity being exhibited. It is important to interrupt this behavior with the aim of teaching young people to know and do better. This means stopping it in the moment, to engage in discussion with students about their language choices or actions in a way that is challenging but also respectful. It is noteworthy that she uses the word respectful, as oftentimes it is genuinely challenging to be respectful towards a person using language and behavior that is grounded in disrespect. It is even more difficult when you move from something like the relatively controlled environment of a schoolroom to a wider public context, and especially when thought leaders are promulgating disrespectful language towards others. I would have liked to navigate to a more conclusive place. However, it has been possible only to explore. We may as critical social theorists, have theories that illuminate social forces and offer critique and analysis on contemporary society. If we are not listening to outside those outside our bubble, we will not make progress in contributing to the shaping of public opinion, political beliefs, creating a society that is inclusive of all and which subscribes to pluralistic values and a commitment to include all voices in shaping both society today and in the future. We are in a perilous place in relation to significant existential challenges for us as a species and for the entire planet. We have a raging climate crisis, a leap forward in artificial and superintelligence that will continue to gather pace. We have an increasing grip on power by oligarchic forces. We have significant decline in civility, respect, acceptance of constitutional values, and the rule of law. We need to do something more than be engaged observers. Thank you very much. I hope that was useful in some way, and I'm really sorry again for the disruption in the middle. And I know it's not easy to have to listen to somebody speak incessantly for over an hour, but I hope at least we covered some things and that you were able to understand what I was saying.
Yes, thank you so much, Professor Siamas Otuama. And we can realize this not as disruption, but as pause. And pauses happen. And so when disruption comes, we can take it as a pause for creative emergence. So thank you. You have touched many aspects. I quickly want to check with you. You wanted to leave by 4 p.m. Indian time, which gives us 11 minutes. Do you have some flexibility on that?
Oh, I can stay for a little bit longer than that, but not too much longer. Maybe 30 minutes maximum. Yeah.
How much? 30 minutes?
Yeah, 30 minutes.
Okay, lovely. That gives us a gracious time.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
thank you. Now, dear friends, let us join in. Now, Professor Palakal, you came a bit late, but on this related issue of media, listening, public sphere, you have done your work. Professor Palakal is a noted sociologist and from India. So, Professor Palakal, please share a bit of your thought. Okay,
Professor Giri, see, the thing is, I was not able to follow the talk, not only because of the pause, in between it was disrupted, and I'm not sure how far it's going to contribute. I don't have electricity here, and it's also raining heavily. So maybe others may start, and I might join after some time. I since I have not followed the thread, and also was not able to get that concept beforehand. Please go ahead with your discussion. I might join after some time because because I was not at all able to get the theme and the thread correctly. Okay. Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Now, Minati, please. Minati, you have been, please share some thought.
Thank you, Anantbhai. Thanks to Professor Syama Sotama for very vast presentation. But as I don't have much knowledge about, the topic discussed about, I could relate. I don't have much knowledge about the world politics, what I want to say, but I could relate it to the grassroots level, actually what is happening in our local area, and all these weak politics and the competitions that bizarre views of media, social media, and everybody is busy in doing I mean, nobody actually is anyone listening. The answer will be no one is listening, whether it is media, social media, or and anything. It is no one is listening. So I was just wondering how can it be? How can we make it? More towards like inward listening. At least people will listen to somebody's point of view. Anant bhai knows, and in recently what is happening in Odisha in educational institution, what is happening, that self immersion of that girl, and how everything is getting politicized. Which side needs in social media? People do not have any in these things. They are just blaming. Everybody is blaming everyone, like no one is in the position of listening, and what is happening, nobody is empathizing with the victim, or I don't know, everybody is pretending to be a victim. So in this full of chaos, I don't know what is the way out. How um I mean, like one of the slides of Professor Siamos Otama was telling, no, the reply exists, but it floats without any rational engagement. That line, no, it is very true. How it is. I mean, there is no reflection. There is no empathy. I don't know what is the way out. I mean, just we would like to have little more discussion on that. Thank you, Anantbhai, for giving me a chance. Thank you.
So Professor Siamas will collect some points and then we
Sir,
would,
can I speak?
just 1 minute, then we would request your reflection. Yes, Tamanna, please.
Yes, sir.
You can
Brilliant.
open your video, Tamanna. We will introduce you to Professor Siamas. So Dr. Tamanna Khosala is also a deep political theorist and and now to be a lawyer. So yes, please.
Yes, sir. A very nice presentation. And, because I have done my PhD in multiculturalism, so I have read a lot of Habermasian theory as well as Iris Marion Young's theory. But the problem is that both these theories were written somewhere in the 80s. Now, in the contemporary world, we need where you have AI and, those kind of things. How science is going to tackle this particular issue of technology, and for example, in what new concepts, what new challenges are we facing, the dialogue theory itself, what it's facing, how would you look at it, sir? Because I guess, I mean, the war between Russia and Ukraine, for example, uh, obviously diplomacy can help, but it's not happening that way. Similarly, with you see the way the world politics is going on, in Syria and Iran and Israel, for example. So if tomorrow, we have a war, then, how would dialogue work? Because dialogue doesn't work. People have to come in to bring about the situation connect the situation in a proper way. So, I mean, I'm just wondering, sir, if you have a theory on this thing. And also, another thing is there that, I mean, I like Iris Minyan's concept of reciprocity, where she talks about the fact that old and young can get together, or people who are anti-nuclear and pro-nuclear, but are same on a certain agenda, like for example, they're vegans, so probably they would be able to connect better. So I guess, I mean, I just wanted to know your views. Thank you.
Thank you, Tamanna. So Afan, please.
Good evening, sir.
Please open your video and sing a
So it
song
was
in a Swedish. Professor Siamas Afan studied in Sweden, in Umeå, north of Sweden. Yes, please.
yes, that was a very insightful presentation, sir. It was really interesting because, like, I have been interested in like all these power dynamics that go on in between, like politics and economics, like, because that is a very interesting combination about, like, where does the power source from? Like, what is the source origin of the power that is, like, when it comes to like media and everything, like, is it the money that talks, or is it like the politic that talks, or like who and what is the power dynamic? That's the biggest confusion that I usually have, like, the thing that I try to get to the bottom of. So yes, that's my fundamental question, like, because
And
it's
also,
kind of, yes, sir.
you have been interested in public policy and kind of,
Yes, sir.
a creative public policy. So if you bring that dimension and also relate to Professor Siama's presentation in terms of public communication and public policy. And in a way, the implication is that creative public policies are needed now, including regulation. But tell one or two lines about a creative public policy that we can have.
Sir, again, like, I've been researching on that as well, and I've realized, like, I mean, even though there's a need for a creative public policy, but how do we promote such kind of things when there is such deep entrenched, like, political structures which have like great lobbying and all those things, like, when there are people who design creative public policy, it doesn't translate into implementation. So that's why I've been, like, looking at the power structure that exists on public discourse, public policy, and, like, politics and economics, because that the interaction between these three is kind of quite interesting to understand, like, because like all the policies that we currently have, they kind of increase social inequality, and that is also because of like the lobbying and is integrated with each other. Like, it's kind of a big knot that we are unable to undo. That is my this thing, sir. Like, I know part of this is because, like, one would be like, public where, because like most of these days, like what happens is, like, like people in big cities, they just like, go from home to workplace and then come back, where there is no interaction in between. Like, making public include stories of each other, like going on within the tapestry of a city or this thing. That would be one public policy, like, I mean, to enhance public spaces which which make people slow down and, like, but then it comes down to the implementation. So that's
Okay.
where, like, that's why I want to know what is the source of this power that. Yes, sir.
Thank you. This point is well made. Thank you, Afan. So now, Dr. Betty Govindan, please. Dr. Betty Govindan is a poet, a social historian, and a freedom fighter from South.
I'm just worried that if you need me to respond, there's a lot of different things, and then it will be very difficult for me to respond to everything. So maybe if I can respond to some and then come back, and then I can take Betty's point maybe after that.
Sure.
Okay, so okay, I want to preface my response by saying I don't suggest that I have the answers. I'm like everybody else. I'm an observer, and I'm a participant, and I see things happening around me. And I think it was interesting one of your colleagues, Tamana, was speaking about reciprocity and and Irish Marion Young, I think, and so on. So we need at some level to be conscious of history, you know. So like, and sometimes we, in the moment, we kind of forget a little bit about history. But just to bring you back a little bit, and I think it's important to reflect on this. In the late 1980s and early into 1990s, there was a fall of the former Eastern Bloc in Europe, primarily Soviet Union and so on and so forth, and a collapse of communism. Now, I mean, before that, there was a very vibrant left political debate and activities in Europe. But after this, the left seemed to have completely collapsed. And I think there was some level in both the left thinking itself and in the public mind a collapsing of the concept of communism and socialism as being the same thing. And I think it's fair to say, with the emergence of the neoliberalism, the left alternative perspective has not really been that prominent. So for marginalized and less affluent and people in society, there was very little answer. Politics really didn't address their issues. What I think has happened at some level is that there's a realization more broadly in society, in Western Europe anyway, where, and in North America as well, I think, there's a sense that everything was organized around the needs, wishes, and orientations of an elite. And this elite was seen as, well, in the past was seen as economic elites, now it was seen as intellectual elites. And intellectual elites. And the ideas emerging from intellectual elites. And this has been seized upon, I suppose, by the right-wing politicians and the oligarchs, and I think they're slightly separate. But they have, I suppose, taken this moment and said, you know, who is speaking for us? How are our voices heard, and so on. So we need to be a little bit careful, I suppose, in terms of how we understand it. I suppose what I'm trying to say is that we are hearing from, you know, the oligarchs, and we're hearing from these right political right-wing populist parties a lot of things that are unsavory. We're hearing a lot of things which we do not agree with as rational people, as people, I suppose, who are engaged in the project of the Enlightenment. Let us be frank about this. These are problematic for us. So how do we get from where we are now to a better place? And I can see a lot of big challenges for us. One of the big challenges is climate. Climate is going to continue to exercise huge issues from an existential point of view for us. And the more extreme it becomes, the greater the problems. And these automatically transfer into social and political problems and economic problems. We see, and this was mentioned, one of the questions, advances in artificial intelligence and so on. And again, this is posing a huge existential issue for us, which I don't want to get into too much detail today because we don't really have time for it. But there are serious issues around whether or not we would continue to be the apic species on the planet anymore. And then the question is, who owns, who controls this? So in a sense, I think we see hollowing out of the center, and in the center, I mean the intellectuals, I mean, people committed to democratic values, democratic ideas. I'm including social democrats, I'm including liberals there who believe in the idea of human rights, the pluralistic society, and so on and so forth. So that is being hollowed out. And that is a big, big problem for us. Then the question is, who has the power? In one strange way, the more marginalized people who were largely excluded or left behind have grabbed some power because they've been able to articulate their views, even if they're coherent and even if some of the views are full of conspiracy theories and hate and so on and so forth. They have, in some senses, been able to grab the microphone. They've been able to speak. And the first speaker spoke a lot about listening and speaking, and I think it's a very, very valid point. There is a lot of talking, an awful lot of talking, and not a lot of listening. And we, including myself, are part of the problem because we are not listening either. Because at some level, we're hearing things that we find very objectionable, things that we feel are horrific, and we are almost trying to block out that, saying what is behind us, what is animating these hostilities. So in some senses, we have to listen more. We have to acknowledge maybe that the power has shifted to the two. We're like the sandwich, it's gone to the two edges. So the ultra rich, well-positioned economic actors have huge amounts of power, and we've seen these ultra billionaires and the power that they exercise. But also at the other end, in some ways, the marginalized have been able to get some level of power as well. Now, unfortunately, I think we've seen this where we've seen some of the power that was emerging from the lower socioeconomic and marginalized groups being hijacked and taken, in a sense, by the oligarchs. And this is a big problem for us. I think the critical issue for us, and you know, there was a reference to Habermas and you know, being primarily written in the 1980s. Of course, it was written in the 1980s, but that's not the point really. The point really is, what was Habermas saying that is relevant for us today? And in an initial version of the lecture, I was going to refer to Hegel and what Hegel could contribute to us as an observer, because Hegel's work comes from a different time, therefore it's not captured in all of the noise in our time, and to some extent the same with Habermas. So in a sense, it gives us something that is almost like an objective external observer. And sometimes the contemporary ones are less objective and obviously get consumed in what's happening around us. So from that point of view, the work of Habermas and even, you know, Pete Stridom's earlier work is written in a time when he didn't have the insights that he has today, but that gives it an additional value. So I suppose in all of this, I have the feeling that we need to listen better. We need to listen not just to what people are saying, but why are they saying it? We need to encourage debate and discussion, even if people are not interested in that. We have to stay to this and raise this issue. We have to urgently create the conditions where there's a stake in society for everyone. And we haven't really been doing that. And this is a big challenge for us. How can we create conditions? Like in my country, there are huge issues around housing, for instance. People don't have proper housing. They can't buy houses, they can't move on. And this is a cause for alienation. So we have to look at the causes of alienation and say, what are the causes of alienation? Why are these people feeling alienated? And why are they, you know, engaged in activities that we don't find very, very useful to us. So I think the fact that some of the theories we're using come from a previous time are not necessarily a disadvantage. We need to use them in a clever way. We need to be more conscious of listening and hearing. We need to be more conscious of power dynamics. And again, you can go back, power was a big issue in sociology back in the 1960s. Maybe we need to take out some of that and start to re-look at some of the things that were said and looked at then. We need to create public spaces where people can articulate their views, can be heard and engage. And I can appreciate this is not so easy, but I think these are the things that we need to urgently address. And we can't comfort ourselves in being like the birds sitting on the telephone wires observing. We have to be part of the challenges that we face today. I just stop there, Ananta, because I hope I've answered some of the questions that people were raising.
Thank you. And I also realize that it is okay for you to spend another 7 minutes with us, given the time you set. Is it okay?
Yeah, we can do another few minutes. Yeah.
So let us listen to Dr. Betty Govindan, please. Dr. Betty Govindan.
Okay, you're not winding up the discussion. Okay, this is Anthony. Yeah, please go ahead. Please go ahead. Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Giri.
Yes,
I'm
please.
happy to join in. I'm sorry I was late because I just returned from the church. I just wanted to say thank you to Dr. Otuoma for his plea. And it's a challenge to all of us in this forum and all those of us around. Are we listening, and what does listening mean? So listening isn't a passive activity. Listening's active, and it's a challenge to me personally and to challenge to all of us. We have concerns for the planet, for women, for children, for justice, for peace, for housing. We know of the war zones around. And sadly, we have organs that deal with these issues. And at a local level, at a national, continental level, at a global level. And we support different initiatives in different ways, but it's still a drop in the ocean. And for me, this forum is a challenge to me and to challenge to all of us. How long? How long? I am in my early 80s now. I've lived through apartheid, lived through so much at a global level, at a continental level. And I feel sad. I've just written a tribute to Ngugi wa Thiong'o, and I felt very sad having lived through his life, knowing what he stood for and all that he urged. And I also thought of our last webinar where we talked about indigenous languages, but here we're not listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Betty. Would you kindly open your video if possible? So you both can see.
Unfortunately, my technology is not allowing me to open the video, so I can just mute and unmute. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Professor Palakal, please. Professor Palakal, if possible,
I have been following.
You can open your video, if possible. Open your video.
I don't think, I told you that I have a very weak connection here.
Okay.
So opening the video may not be, may not be good. Yes. So I have been following the discussion a little bit. After the talk, unfortunately, I was not able to, really follow the talk by Siamis. But then after, when he, just made his remarks just now, I could follow him. I'm not very sure whether I would like to, agree with all that has been already been conversed here, particularly the question of power. particular the power that is being exercised politically, particularly, because in and through this social media, the new media systems, and we are challenged. We are warned that we need to be very careful, conscious. Listening has to be a very conscious activity. Adding to that, I would like to also bring the idea of surveillance, that we are under surveillance all the time, under surveillance. This is the age of the algorithmic globe, so as to characterize our present day society, in the context of this digital world, digital media, that is in a way, has established its power, its hegemony over us in and through the major players of the world today. Number one, politicians. Number two, the corporate business magnates. And number three, the bureaucrats, who are at the beck and call of these two, the politicians and the corporates, the big business people. So these people, have an illegal kind of bond. That's what we realize in every country, particularly, those the so-called, the Trump or even India. We find that this chronic capitalism, having this illegal relation or bond between these three primary players, who in a way, have organized this very planned, organized, engineered surveillance program over people, not only in terms of their public, presence and communications, interactions, etc., in their private sphere also. So because of that, not only the public sphere that is being shrunk, the private sphere also, we have to be very, very careful, unless this through the AIs, so so-called algorithms, artificial intelligence, different, apps, they take control over us, not only in politics, in public, socially, and even economically. Of course, we have the concepts like the digital capitalism or surveillance capitalism, the chaos machine. All these describe how the present day algorithmic world has, made our lives, both public and private, under constant surveillance. So, as it has already been said here by many, that we need to be very vigilant about the cacophonies that we hear in the electronic media, in the new media. So I would like to emphasize this aspect of surveillance, together with this hegemonic power that is being exercised by people, particularly at the helm of politics like Trump and his reign. We need to be very, very vigilant about this reality that is now created in this algorithmic globe. So this is just one, adding to that challenge and its seriousness, that we need to be very vigilant about listening now, particularly through social media, the new media. Yes.
Thank you, Professor Palakal. Now, very quickly, Nidhi Singh, please, just a minute. Nidhi Singh, please unmute yourself. Nidhi?
Namaste, sir.
Yes, namaskar. If possible, yes, Nidhi, welcome to Vishwaneedam.
Thank you, sir. Namaste, sir. I'm Nidhi from Chhatrapati Shahuji Maharaj University, Kanpur. I'm very privileged that I am attending this session, and it's my second time that when I'm listening to Dr. Seema Sotuma, and his inputs are always beneficial for our research work, and I'm very thankful to Dr. Tuma that for taking such useful session. And I'm not an expert, just a learner. And I will try to implement these perspectives in my future research papers. And I would like to thank Professor Ananta sir and Mr. Ranveer Kumar sir and Minati ma'am for organizing such wonderful session. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Nidhi. So, Professor Siamas, would you like to share a thought about this response before we conclude?
Yeah. Okay. So just, I mean, obviously it's hard for me in a lecture to go into everything, and the issue of surveillance and so on and so forth is a very complex and pernicious one, which of course deserves a lot more attention. And it does speak to things like power and privacy and autonomy and all of those really important values that we have placed at the core. What I think is deeply troubling in the moment is that conventions like the rule of law, things like human rights, things like constitutional primacy and these kinds of things have been greatly undermined. The idea of us being part of an international community and so on, these have been greatly undermined in the present time. And the sort of discourse that has filled the void, as it were, the kind of discourse that we are listening to is deeply, deeply, deeply problematic and troubling. And I think there's a great urgency for us to contribute to the discussion and debate in a way that's meaningful. We can't talk down to people. We can't be condescending. We have to engage with people. We have to listen to what they're saying. And I really liked, I think it was Betty was saying about hearing and listening. This is actively listening is a very difficult task, but we're going to have to listen more. And if we are going to emerge from this to a better future, then we need people on board. We need allies. We need people with us. And the people we need urgently with us are very often the people that we see now as speaking against us. You know, like the MAGA base, or what are they called in the United States. So very many of those are marginalized people who feel excluded, feel left behind, feel not listened to, and they feel that Trump is listening to them. Now, of course, we may see a different reality to that, but nonetheless, this is the perception. So we have to get into that space. We have to start engaging people more. We have to give people hope. We have to give people a stake in the society. Unless we do that, then this is going to get worse, not better. And we have to do it urgently, because things like climate, things like artificial intelligence, and indeed like things like surveillance and so on and so forth we've mentioned, and the use of power and the potential, use of power by very, very wealthy individuals and so on. It's very, very, very urgent. So we can't just sit by. We have to really figure out ways in which we can engage with people and bring them along and get them to tease out their thinking in ways that are better for themselves and better for all of us. So I'll leave it there, Ananta, if that's okay.
Thank you, Professor Siamas. So it has been an enriching conversation. And as we listen, and as we would have to develop the capacity of our listening, how do we really develop our capacity for listening? And it is here, like education, your work on adult education, because capacity building, not just in a functional sense, but in its multidimensional sense. And this is a challenge before contemporary society, because contemporary societies, especially Western societies, beginning with a focus on argumentation, and it has forgotten the interlinked task of listening, and so argumentation has gone way, one-sided way, without attending to the capacity to listen. The other thing is that listening has a spiritual dimension, and spiritual dimension in that sense. And I think another related challenge is the challenge of spiritual cultivation, and along with elitism and a naive secularism, a kind of sacredness of life. And therefore, if each person is sacred, then also that the point of view is sacred. So with this, now I invite, of course, we had Professor Masoor Sahab. I think Professor Siamas is, it's a bit getting late for him. So we would listen to him on another occasion. Otherwise, Professor Masoor Sahab, just 1 minute, if you'd just like to say, please, Professor Masoor. Professor Masoor is from Kashmir. He's a professor of English literature and a poet.
I'm sorry, and I'm gonna really have to go because I gotta and I have the other engagement is really pressing. I'm really sorry.
So then we would just thank you in half a minute. So Minati, please.
Thank you, Anantavai. I, Minati Pradhan, on behalf of Swadhyaya Sahachakra and Vishwaneedam Center for Asian Blossoming, would like to thank our today's chief speaker, Professor Siamos Otama, for very detailed presentation, and thank you for answering all the queries. Thank you so much, sir. We are really indeed very grateful to you for your presentation. Thank you so much. I would also like to thank Professor Ganluigi, Tamanna, Dr. Tamanna Khosala, Professor Betty Govindan, Professor Masoor, Afan, and Professor Anthony Palakal. Sorry, I forgot Anthony Palakal, and the people who have joined us in our YouTube and Facebook platform, and as well as in our online. So I thank all of you. Thank you all for being a co-worker in this journey. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Siamas. Have a good lunch and afternoon.
Thank you. Okay, bye-bye.